You're listening to the Cyberwire Network, powered by N2K.
Meet Mimecast. They're in the business of taking companies at risk of cyber attack and putting them at ease. Picture this. It's Monday morning. You're cruising through hundreds of unread emails. Your impulse to promptly click, download, or respond could be a prompt to launch a cyber attack. An email address is a direct digital path to the mind, the machine, and the data of every person in your organization. It needs better security. I know what you're thinking. I'm all set. I have Microsoft 365 protection, Dave. It might not be enough. That's where Mimecast comes in. They've developed a system that fortifies your email security and reduces costs, risks, and complexities, enabling you and your business to work protected. So before you click your next email, visit Mimecast.com to start your free 30-day trial. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CyberWire's Research Saturday. I'm Dave Bittner, and this is our weekly conversation with researchers and analysts tracking down the threats and vulnerabilities, solving some of the hard problems, and protecting ourselves in a rapidly evolving cyberspace. Thanks for joining us.
We were looking for campaigns around Ukraine in the context of geopolitical situation and specifically the war in Ukraine.
That's Dmitry Bestuzhev. He's a senior director at Blackberry. The research we're discussing today is titled RomCom Resurfaces, targeting politicians in Ukraine and U.S.-based healthcare, providing aid to refugees from Ukraine.
So when you look into the threat landscape in Ukraine, you usually have all those threat actors which are known and typical, like APT29, Gamma Radon, and some others. We have seen so many wipers which destroy the hard drive. But eventually we found something which caught our attention. We knew that was something new, not connected to any previous threat actor. And we realized it was RomCom Rad. The interesting part of this, by mistake, another vendor, security vendor, had attributed this threat actor or this tool, this weapon, to a cyber criminal group. It means like with a group with financial motivations. However, we found and we proved that RomCom is not connected to any financially motivated operation or group threat actor behind it. In fact, it's a weapon used against the Ukraine, and the threat actor behind it carefully follows the news and the geopolitical developments. So we found that RomCom has been targeting specifically like victims in the United States and also in Ukraine and Western countries, targeting healthcare, targeting military systems, NATO summit, and others.
Well, as you mentioned, RomCom is a remote access Trojan, a rat. What is their game plan here? How do they generally get on someone's system?
Usually, everything begins with the initial infection vector, which is spear phishing. There is nothing new in here at first sight. However, we know that the threat actor behind it use like very specific themes, like topics and information, which sometimes not even in the news yet, or just went to the news. Like for instance, the deployment of new tanks in Ukraine, or pilots trainings in Ukraine, or even like Belarus when also interacting with Russia close to the border of Ukraine and Poland specifically. So that's like the interesting part of there, and that information that information many times available only even in a conventional world. That means it's not anything like cyber. It's carefully used for the social engineering crafting and then deployed through spear phishing messages.
Hmm. So are we guessing here that perhaps the folks who run this have access to high-level intel that, so they have a jump on the news cycle?
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct. So we suspect as well, like, well, one of the, let's say, like, sources RomCom use in their campaigns is or like news, yeah, like geopolitical news, but at the same time, it's information received somehow from other sources. It's probably like also human intelligence and just information which can be used still from open sources, but it's not necessarily in the news.
Well, let's walk through this together. I mean, suppose that I am someone that RomCom wants to come after here, and I'm, minding my own business, checking my email. How does it begin?
Email. Yeah, the victim receives an email which usually includes an attachment or a link which leads to the first stage malware. So that malware is in charge of deploying next stage, and that next stage, finally, the payload. So sometimes when we look into that social engineering, like emails, it can be anything. It can be just like in military order. It can be like a healthcare plan to support refugees from Ukraine. It can be even software, like software which is used by the victim, like updates and things like that. So the victim what receives in the end, it's a melted application. I call it melted. It means like trojanized. It's a legitimate application along with a malicious library, one malicious library inside. The fascinating thing is in the very last campaign we saw on June 22nd, when the threat actor behind RomCom targeted NATO summit, it used at least two exploits. So the technical capabilities were expanded by RomCom. They used, technically speaking, one zero day and also one end day exploit, and they relied on new techniques like using RTF files, and finally the backdoors, stealing information from the victims' machines and profiling the victims. So it's all about stealing secrets.
And what specific type of information are they targeting here?
Military information, diplomatic information. In case of the attack against the healthcare here in the United States, it's probably information about those who are refugees, like who receive help, who they are, names, full names, date of births, any other information like the address in the United States, everything what a medical record has. It has a lot of value. It's just and not because of any cyber crime. It's information based on like individuals who came from Ukraine and who receives help here.
And your research points out that they're making use of some typo squatting here as well?
Yes, indeed. That's because you see, like everybody, like, or at least like most, we learned that before you make click, or when you make click, check the address if the domain is correct and such. But when you register a domain which is very close to the original one, where the difference is just one character, one letter, and that letter is actually very similar, like graphically, visually speaking, to another letter, so it's hard for the victim sometimes to spot the difference, and especially it's a technique which can be used also to, let's say, to fool SOC. It's a security operational center when, let's say, those operators are sitting there and looking on and seeing like domains very similar to the original or legitimate domains. There is room for a mistake by a SOC operator to say, well, it's a clean domain, it's a legitimate domain. There's nothing in there.
So, what did you all see in terms of any communications with a command and control server?
The communication, it's always encrypted. It's interesting because it's
Hmm.
definitely it's if an incident response team will start its job and also will start like sniffing the traffic and such, the information, it's when it's encrypted, it's not accessible, at least like easily accessible for the threat actor, for the operator at SOC or incident response team. And they usually also use like a specific port. Very very interesting. That port for us has been always like a silver bullet also to go behind them and to find new domains. They were just like a jump hosts. The whole thing, like the whole communication, it's through usually at least one or more jump hosts, which protects the, or let's say anonymize the threat actor behind it. So when you see those connections, like from your side, you will probably see only like connection to a legitimate cloud, which is a server, which is legitimate, but it's on control of the threat actor.
Now, if I find myself infected with this, is it going to reach out to other devices on my network, or does it stay contained on one endpoint?
The threat actor, once infected the computer, and of course, like once it has the control to the computer, it has a full capabilities not just to steal the information, but also to, let's say, profile the network. What other computers are connected in there? What is the, like, how to move laterally? So it's all up to the threat actor. Like what's next? There is no any, let's say, like a USB self propagation module, but still, if it would be such need, we know that the threat actor behind it could implement it.
Interesting. And who is it that they appear to be targeting here? I mean, is it primarily organizations who are sympathetic to Ukraine's interests?
Yes, Western countries, those countries which support Ukraine in this war against Russia. It's interesting that some of the applications or software abused by RomCom and used in targeting, let's say, military units are known to be used actually by NATO countries. So NATO used those applications. So we see that RomCom is definitely, let's say, like mad about anyone who provides help Ukraine and carefully and systematically targets those allies.
Now, additionally, you found something interesting in I guess, a Trojanized version of the popular GoToMeeting software.
That's correct. GoToMeeting, AnyDesk, like applications we use on daily basis. So imagine if you find those libraries and those modules in the system, like an infected system. I mean, like even like AnyDesk, and it's of course you understand it's like, oh, it's a clean application, and of course it needs internet, and it connects to somewhere to the internet. You go and you check the IP address, and you see it's a clean server, and it's somewhere like in the US. So the first thing you will like probably conclude it's like, oh, it's clean. I don't know who's using any disk, and like in my network, where probably they just use it for a reason, or even if the victim, like the whole organization, target organization, really use any desk, so it will be just like a green light, to completely lose that signal, and for the threat actors to continue working from the network.
And these Trojanized apps, do they maintain their original functionality? In other words, they have this bad functionality under the hood, but if I were to boot one of these programs up, would it still function the way it was originally intended?
Yes, that's the thing. So it's not like when you get a fake application, completely fake, you run it and nothing happens, or just like a weird error. No, here it's the opposite. So it's a full version of a legitimate application melted with one malicious library, which is in the archive. So once the installation process runs, it installs both the legitimate program and the implant. So for the victim, there is no reason to believe that it's anything malicious. And even the website, it's crafted in a way, the malicious website where it's downloaded from, it's an exact copy of the legitimate website of the vendor. And even like if you click, let's say, on chat with the specialist or support, it will take you to the real chat. So you will be speaking with a real tech support team. So that's how it's functional for it really works.
So what are your recommendations for folks to best protect themselves against this? What do you suggest?
In this case, if someone is already infected, it's crucial to have a full visibility over network traffic. So, and to start just probably with playing with different strategies. For example, like to allow only that traffic which is allowed and known as clean. Everything new, unconfirmed, must be analyzed manually. Second, and of course, it's always like that. If you have access to the endpoint and you run an analysis on the endpoint, basically like grabbing the memory image, analyzing all the events in the system, you can find those implants in your network at the endpoint. Another thing is we just released a blog post. It was last week with detection rules, Yara rules, and Sigma rules. Sigma for behavioral analysis and Yara for files detection. You can use as well to run it in your file system or to run it in your computer and just looking for the behaviors. You may also detect those things. We also have IOCs publicly available for anyone, like domains, IP addresses, which is the first thing to grab and check with the proxy logs and to see if there was any match in the past or today.
How do you rate RomCom in terms of their sophistication here? It seems as though they're well resourced.
Yes, it is definitely someone who works for a state. It's a nation state or an affiliated group to a nation state, and because of the context, it's someone who works for Russia or in Russia or for the interests of Russia. So imagine like using a 0-day in one of the campaigns which happened just about 40 days ago. It means the group itself it's sophisticated because it's not only about having access to those exploits. It's about using them in the wild, even assuming the risk that probably highly likely the operation will be discovered, like all the artifacts will be recovered, analyzed. So that's someone who's ready even to burn the exploit. So it means the interests, the motivation behind it is high, and the fact that they're using 0 days, it shows that it's someone who's a nation state.
Our thanks to Dmitry Bestuzhev from Blackberry for joining us. The research is titled RomCom Resurfaces, targeting politicians in Ukraine and U.S.-based healthcare providing aid to refugees from Ukraine. We'll have a link in the show notes. Are you frustrated with cyber risk scores backed by mysterious data, zero context, and cloudy reasoning? Typical cyber ratings are ineffective, and the true risk story is begging to be told. It's time to cut the BS. Black Kite believes in seeing the full picture with more than a score, one where companies have complete clarity in their third-party cyber risk using reliable, quantitative data. Make better decisions. Reduce your uncertainty. Trust Black Kite. The CyberWire Research Saturday podcast is a production of N2K Networks, proudly produced in Maryland out of the startup studios of Data Tribe, where they're co-building the next generation of cybersecurity teams and technologies. This episode was produced by Liz Irvin and senior producer Jennifer Iben. Our mixer is Elliot Peltzman, our executive editor is Peter Kilpie, and I'm Dave Bittner. Thanks for listening.